just because you've done something horrible doesn't mean you can't turn yourself around and do something good.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse. Hey Posse, I'm your host, Chrissy Benson. First, if you haven't yet picked up a copy of the vegan women's fiction classic, Marrying Myself, by me, Christine Melanie Benson, do it now. It's a fun summer beach read with a deeper message about figuring out who we are and what matters when the whole image we had of what our life was going to look like is suddenly out the window. Find it on Amazon, at the Slow Burn Bookshop in Nashville, Tennessee, or visit my website, ChristineMelanieBenson.com, to find out how to order through your local bookstore. By making Marrying Myself an international bestseller, together we can normalize veganism through the arts. And on the subject of life not turning out quite how we expect, has that happened to you? If so, I can help. Since 2014, I've been providing personal coaching to women and men around the country to help them get on the path toward the life they want and the person they want to be. Email me directly at christinembenson@gmail.com to set up an appointment. Finally, our Zoom group, Vegan Peace, has been such a joy for me to be part of. But now that the busy fall season is almost upon us, I will be scaling back our calls from once a week to once a month on the second Tuesday of every month. It will be the same Zoom link. If you'd like to be on the email list for reminders, email veganposse.email@gmail.com. And now for this week's episode. As a vegan author myself, I was intrigued when I first learned about Susan Goldsholl's fantasy trilogy, Everything's Better with Bacon and You Can Never Have Enough Butter, but then along comes karma. But when I learned more about Susan's personal history, I was even more intrigued. Most of us have done things we regret, but few of us end up in prison for those things. Talk about life not turning out how we expect. Susan, who went vegetarian at an early age out of compassion for non-human animals, shared with me that while struggling with addiction to heroin, she was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. This interview is the first time Susan has ever spoken publicly about this experience. To me, her history demonstrates the power of active addiction, so much so that it overshadowed her innate sense of compassion and justice and basic right and wrong. I'll let you hear Susan tell her story in her own words, but I will simply say that I applaud Susan for her courage, vulnerability, and candor in discussing these deeply sensitive issues, as well as for her books, which I read cover to cover and believe will appeal to a wide swath of young fantasy-loving readers who might never think about veganism on their own. So enjoy this conversation with author Susan Goldsholl. Susan, welcome to the Vegan Posse. Are you ready for the ride of your life?
I am. I'm gripping the sides of my chair.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Why don't we go back to the very beginning? Where are you from? Where did you grow up? And when did you first start thinking about the animals in our food system?
I was born in Little Falls, New Jersey, which was very rural at the time. And when I was 4, my family moved to Ellicott City, Maryland, which was also extremely rural. I always had an affinity for animals. We always had pets. We had cats, we had dogs. My mother had pet geese, and my mother was always rescuing birds, rescuing baby mice, but I was a carnivore, and I never made the connection as a child. And being raised in the 50s, I mean, it was a whole different ballgame. There was no such thing as veganism. I don't even know of anyone who was a vegetarian back then, although there probably were a few, but it was quite a different world.
Yeah.
But as I got older, I really started to recognize that the same thing that we saw in a dog, in our pet dog's eyes, you could see in any animal's eyes. You could see it in a cow, you could see it in a fish, you could see it in a bird, you could see it in a turkey. I mean, it was the same level of consciousness and innocence and vulnerability. And that, that I started thinking about that when I was a teenager.
And you went vegetarian at a relatively young age, younger than a lot of us do.
Yes.
How did that?
It went well. What had happened was there was a deli near us. It was actually like a farm stand, and I think they raised their own cattle and pigs and then slaughtered them. And they served these sandwiches for $1 a piece, which were really thick. They were several inches thick with sliced ham or whatever meat you wanted and cheese. And we had stopped and my family had stopped and we'd each gotten a sandwich, and I bit into it. And when I looked at the sandwich where I'd bitten it, I saw the flesh was all compressed. The layers of ham, it was a ham sandwich, were all compressed. And it really hit me that I was eating flesh, because, I could see the teeth marks, and it was just like I had just bitten into a big piece of flesh. And that was when I really became a vegetarian. And
did you say anything at the time?
That's when I tried to become a vegetarian, but it was really impossible back then. It was a whole different world.
Yeah. I'm just curious, when you ate that sandwich and just had that impression, did you say anything out loud? Did you express what you were feeling to your parents? No.
We didn't have that kind of family where you could really talk about your feelings, and they would have thought I was nuts. So no, I myself.
And do you have brothers and sisters?
I have two. I had two brothers. One died 6 years ago, and the other one is still with us, thank God, and we're very close.
So no one knew what was going on inside you?
No.
Okay.
No. And then later, I became a vegetarian. And then later, when I started using drugs, that all went out.
Yeah, so tell us a little about just that trajectory.
Okay.
When you became vegetarian, and just the whole world of, being a hippie. Some people these days might not even know what that word means. So
that's true.
For a younger audience, why don't you explain just what that whole culture is?
Yeah. Yep. There were, in the 60s, there were drugs everywhere. And I gravitated toward, I smoked pot and I used LSD. And then there were some rich kids in Towson, suburban Towson, which is a suburb of Baltimore, who started using heroin, going into the city and using heroin. And I was dating a suburbanite kid. He wasn't rich, he was just regular middle class from Towson, but he was part of that crowd, and he exposed me to it. And it was just instant. Like, I just took to it immediately. And I've since found out.
How old were you at that time?
16. And I
16,
found out,
wow.
Yeah, that when my mother had told me I became really ill, and they didn't know what it was. It was some kind of lung condition. They thought it was like acute croupy bronchitis or something. And I was in a tented playpen with a humidifier going for 6 months, and on paregoric, that entire time. Now, people don't know what paregoric is these days, but back then it was frequently used for teething, and it's an opium derivative. So I was on a narcotic for 6 months at the age of 1.5 to 2. So who knows what that did to my brain structure? But when I used heroin, it was just instant. Like, I just instantly took to it. So
so what happened?
David and I broke up. So we broke up because of that, because I was very concerned about our trajectory. So I broke up with him. And then.
So you were trying to stay on the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then years later, what happened was we got back together, after many years, and he
And
wasn't
so your
using.
experience, when you had just had that one single experience with
No, no,
heroin?
no. We
Oh,
used it
okay.
maybe 5 or 6 times together, and then I
Okay.
was scared to death.
Yeah.
And then many years later, we got back together.
And
And
what, just one more question. How were you using it? Were you sniffing it? Were you
no,
injecting it?
no, shooting it. And back
Oh,
then,
wow.
the needles
Okay.
were huge. I mean, they weren't like the little tiny needles that doctors use today. The needle tips were gigantic. And
Wow.
so then,
So you were adventurous. I mean, you were
yeah, well, yeah, I
willing.
was.
Yeah, you were up for a lot of things.
Yeah, I was a wild child. And then when I was later in my mid 20s, David and I got back together, and he wasn't using at the time, but then we were renting a house together, the bottom half of the house, and a friend of his moved in upstairs, and he was using morphine. Back then, windows had sashes on them. That's how they were raised and lower. It was a rope that raised so when you pulled it up, the sash would go up or down. And I was closing a window, and the sash broke, and it amputated the end of my finger. Whoop, this little finger. And so we went to the hospital. Surgeon, hand surgeon. He took a skin graft from my arm, and just using Novocaine, and just sewed this, filed the bone down and sewed the skin graft on. But he didn't give me, and we didn't think to ask for painkillers. So when I went home, so Ray came downstairs and offered me a shot of heroin, not, I'm sorry, morphine. And then I was back off to the races. So after that, we went through quite a while of David started using too. We went through a period of addiction, and then we got on methadone maintenance, and we were on that
Oh,
for.
wow. And what were you doing? What was the rest of your life like? Were you
I was
working? Were
working.
you in school?
I was
Okay.
working at the time. I was working. I had an office job, and I was doing well in that job. And then finally, we broke. David started using again, even though we were on methadone. I broke up with him again. So it's hard reconstructing all this because it was just like a giant blur of addiction.
I
So
believe
I
it.
I
Yeah.
got clean from methadone, and then when I was 30, no, was I 38, 35? I was in my 30s. I went back to college. I did community college, and I got enough credits in a year to go to University of Baltimore. And then after I was there for a year, I was able to apply to law school because they had a special program. I had the highest LSAT score that year for law school, and since I was older, they allowed me to come in, and I only needed, like, I forget how many credits, 1 year's worth of credits to get my undergrad degree. So they applied the law school credits to my undergrad degree, and then
Oh, wow. So you
I
were
ended up
really
finishing
accelerated.
finishing law school and college in 5 years.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so then
How was that? I mean, that sounds stressful. That
it
sounds
was fine.
like
I
a
mean,
lot.
I was thriving actually. And then the last year I was also working. In the second year, I clerked for a large law firm. And then they hired me as a clerk, and I worked part time, and I also went to law school. And
Wow.
then,
And drugs were not an issue at that
no,
point. Those were part of your past.
no.
Was it hard, stopping using heroin and
Oh,
were you still on
yeah.
methadone?
Oh my God. Methadone was actually the worst. That took forever to stop feeling the physical effects from it. It was awful. Leg cramps, stomach. I mean, it was awful. And also stress, like panic attacks and stress, because your brain chemistry is changed so much by narcotics. And
Yeah.
methadone was really did a number. The period to get off of that was much longer than heroin. So then,
So by college, law school, all of that, you were.
oh, it was all in my past. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So then what happened was my son went to Carnegie Mellon, and I really took it hard when he left. I mean, I'm, very close to him, and it was
Was who was your son?
he.
Was he a son you had with David?
No, I was married before David. I got
Oh,
pregnant when I was 17,
oh, wow.
and
Okay.
and married, and then he played. I don't want to go into it, but anyway, we broke up, and then that's when I went back with David. I mean, I was
Okay.
very tumultuous youth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You were packing a lot in.
yeah, yeah, it was like pretty nonstop. So then when my son went to college, I went into a severe depression. I really missed him. It was awful. And the firm I was working for was a large law firm. There was a big banking crisis back then, and they had been involved with one of the banks that had caused a lot of these problems in Baltimore. And it ended up causing the law firm to split up, which
Mm.
was also extremely stressful. And then the the guy I'd been dating for many years, all through law school, we ended up breaking up. And so the three things I just went into, I think it was a clinical depression. And and I ended up going downtown and buying heroin, and I started using again. And
Wow. Do you remember like the day it was just
I
impulsive
remember,
decision?
I don't remember going downtown, but I remember just laying on the sofa. I remember that day vividly and feeling just like my whole world had fallen out from under me. And I just, you know, I feel badly for people who live with clinical depression because it really is unbelievable. It's very hard to function at all. I needed help. I probably needed like an antidepressant or something, but instead I gave myself my own antidepressant.
Well, I mean, what you're describing. I mean, those are intense life circumstances. I mean, three major
Yeah,
hits all at once. Of course, you're going to be having a tough time. And yeah, if you don't have the source of support, you turn to the unhealthy ones.
right.
Yeah. And how old were you at that point?
Oh, jeez. I think I was 41, 40, 41. I can't remember. It's really a
Yeah.
blur.
So at that point you were a successful professional.
Yeah,
You know, you'd been thriving in your career.
right.
So what happened from there?
There were various partners who wanted to take me with them to where they ended up, but I really had not a lot of interest in working the way I had been, that golden cage thing with the big law firms with associates, where you work an unbelievable amount of hours. I mean, it was nothing for me to be there till midnight and have to be in at 7 the next day.
Yeah.
So
I
I
mean, as you
rather,
know, of course, I'm a former lawyer. So, yes,
yeah, I
I'm
know, I
well
know.
aware of the
Yeah.
culture. Yes.
So I ended up going with a sole practitioner. And that was, I mean, I haven't talked about this like really, and I can't even remember. And I've never spoken about it publicly. But I ended up stealing money from him, from his bank account. And because at that point I ended up with a $600 to $1,000 a day habit. It was back then there was a little bit of fentanyl around that they would cut drugs with, but not very often. And the quality was poor compared to what probably I would imagine is available today from the amount of drug overdoses that there are. But so you had to spend a lot of money. And of course, my tolerance kept increasing and increasing and increasing. And I ended up in a position
Well,
where
before you go there, yeah, how long a time period are we talking from that first day where you bought that heroin downtown and then when you left and were working with the sole practitioner?
probably, so because our firm had broken up. So,
Yeah.
and so I,
And so you were a functioning user for
yes,
a period of
more
time.
or
Yeah.
less. It got
Just kind of
more and
holding
more
it together,
non-functional.
working for him.
Yeah, and
Right.
I became pretty non-functional at the end. And so I guess it went on for about a year.
Oh,
And then,
wow. That's a long time to be trying to hold that together.
yeah.
Wow.
And so then when it came down to it and I was about to be discovered, all I could think of was my next fix. And what was standing in my way was being discovered. So I decided that in my really tightly wrapped mind that the best thing to do was to have him killed. And so my drug dealer, actually, I recruited her and we almost succeeded, but then we ended up driving him to the hospital, and because she did stab him twice, but it was superficial wounds, thank God. And we drove him to the hospital and dropped him off and then just went home. And of course, I was arrested immediately.
Wow.
I mean, it was all insane.
Wow. And how, like, again, what was the time frame that this all happened in between, coming up with this plan and then
Oh, right away,
carrying
like
it
the
out?
same, like within 24 hours, this
Wow.
plan. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So,
And
and
yeah,
then I
were
ended up,
you there during the
yes,
attempt?
I was driving the car and she was in the back seat.
Wow. Wow. What was going on in your mind? Do you even remember?
Just horror. I mean, no, it's like the whole thing is just horror. So, you know, I was arrested, I pled guilty. It was pretty high profile, and obviously in Baltimore, because, an attorney trying to have her partner killed. It was, and especially with the background that I had, and people knew me and they were all like, "What?" And which is usually the case when somebody cracks up. But anyway, so I was sentenced to 20 years, and I was fortunate that one of the former partners at the big law firm that had broken up, Jerry Martin, lawyer, brought in a lawyer who was his partner at the time, Greg Bernstein, who later became the state's attorney for Baltimore City. And they represented me pro bono, and Greg ended up doing all the work. And he ended up getting the judge to modify my sentence at 7 years and release me at 7 years. So I was fortunate because the parole board, was just denying parole.
And you had gotten clean again in prison. Is
Oh
that
God,
correct?
yes, yes, that was, yeah, it was necessary. And my parents were actually glad I was in prison because they had tried everything, and they felt,
So they knew what was going on
yeah.
with you. They knew about
Well,
this
they didn't
relapse.
they didn't know. They knew at various stages. And I worked so much that, I didn't see them that often. So
Yeah. And what about your son?
he
Did he
he
know? What did he know about
no,
what was going
he
on?
did not know at all.
Wow. That sounds really lonely and
Yeah.
really isolating. What was prison like?
It it was a good experience for me.
Really?
Yes, the I found a lot of them had been abused when they were children, and they had a lot of problems, and they ended up using drugs, and they were very nurturing when they were off drugs, and we were very supportive of each other. When my father died while I was in prison, and I was so close to him, and I had an incredible support group between not just the inmates, but officers and the person I worked for, the woman who ran this it was called Educational Materials Distribution Center, where we sent out, I would answer the phone, and various organizations and hospitals, colleges would order these free brochures on all these different health issues. Back then, AIDS was a big one. So we had lots of HIV prevention, but other types of health. And so she was very supportive. I mean, it's amazing. I think men's prisons are quite different, and I
Hmm.
don't know what prison and women's prisons are like now, if you have gangbangers in them and stuff, but we didn't have that back then.
Wow,
Because this was
that's
94.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And I
what
did a vegetarian diet. I hadn't been vegetarian while I was going through all that stuff because I didn't care about animals. I didn't care about anything except getting my next fix. But when I was in prison, I did have a special diet. So I was able to practice that at least.
Wow, that's so interesting that prison really offered you that reset.
Yeah. And that's what I needed. I really
Different
needed a total
ways.
reset.
Yeah.
And the shock and
Yeah.
horror of what I'd gone through was pretty much of a reset. But this was, like really completed that whole reset.
That's
He's like, "Oh,
fascinating.
it's
Yeah.
just
And how was
amazing."
it for you? How was it for you just having that time and just, having to be present with yourself and just contemplate, what you'd done, what you'd been through, what you'd tried to do?
I wrote a lot. I wrote a lot, and I had the opportunity to do that, which I appreciated. I also did a lot of double acrostics, New York Times double acrostics puzzles.
Right, right. Just keeping your mind,
Yes.
yeah, occupied with something. Yeah. And how did you, I mean, again, you're a vegetarian, you're a compassionate person, and yet you'd tried to have a human being killed. Like,
I
how
wasn't a
did you
vegetarian.
come?
Yeah, I know. It's
Right. Well, now you were. Now you were.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
So how did you just make sense of that? How do you make sense of that even now?
it was horrifying. I mean, it was like I couldn't even think about it. Every time I would try to think about it, it would just, make my brain explode. It was horrifying to know that I was capable of that. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a long time ago. And again, I appreciate your willingness to go there in this forum. It's, as you know, I'm a counselor at an addiction rehab, so I know what addiction can bring people to. A lot of people out there may not fully understand. Yeah, just in your own words, how would you describe the effect of addiction on our otherwise sound moral compass?
Well, it slowly destroys it. It's a process, but it slowly destroys your moral compass because the more physically addicted you become and the higher your tolerance becomes, and the longer you're in that pattern and practice of using, your whole world just centers around getting that next fix. And so, you really don't end up with much of a moral compass at all. I mean, I know I cared about my parents still, and that was about it. And my son, of course, my son, who was always my top
Yeah.
priority. But, I wasn't a good daughter, and I certainly wasn't a good mother. Fortunately, he was an adult by then. So, it
And
was,
it sounds like they all stood by you
they
throughout this
did.
whole time.
Absolutely. But,
Yeah, that
they
must have
were,
meant a lot to you.
yeah, but they also, were just felt terribly for my partner, and you know they didn't excuse what I'd done or make excuses for me, but they loved me, and it was unconditional, so I was lucky.
Yeah, truly unconditional. Yeah, you got to test that. Not that that was the aim of this whole
But
occurrence, but that,
but they didn't try to cover it up or try to make excuses, which a lot of people, seems like, when you hear about other horrible things that people have done, and then when their families try to surround them and almost make it like it was somebody else's fault. They didn't do that at all.
mm, interesting. So, well, quick, did you know any other vegetarians in prison?
I mean, I knew them because we would go through. There was a special food line, but they were few and far between. And I was housed with people who had longer sentences. So because we had regular work and work schedules, and we had more, more normal lives, we wouldn't make a lot of noise at night. And so the people I was housed with, I think there was probably only one other person who was a vegetarian in there.
And what was it like being in there and just believing at that point that you were going to be there for how long was it that you were sentenced for?
20,
20
but
years?
yeah, so I would have, if I didn't get parole, it would be two-thirds of the sentence in Maryland for a violent offender.
I mean, were you just taking it one day at a time, or how was that
Yes,
for
that's
you
the
with
only
the
way you can really
prospect?
do it.
Okay. Wow. But then you got released after 7 years. That
Yes,
must have been just obviously a huge relief.
it
What was that
was,
like for you?
except that what I came home to was my mother had cancer of the brain, which was misdiagnosed. They thought it was Alzheimer's. We found out at the end that it was actually her whole brain was engulfed by a brain tumor. But I came home to her, my parents' house, and it was like a wreck. I mean, it was awful. And it was because she had been living there by herself and she had dementia. And my brother, my one brother's wife, would do what they could, but they had very busy lives. And so I ended up taking care of her until she died a year later. And it
Oh,
was like,
wow.
that was extremely traumatic. But,
Yeah.
at the end, hospice had given her, they had given me vials of liquid morphine to at one point, and to dose her with when she was in pain or agitated. And when she died, called them, and I had them come pick it up. I put it on the back porch. It really was a total reboot, everything that had happened. I had no interest at all.
Wow. Wow. Oh, wow. So you got out of prison, but were faced with, yeah, like you said, more trauma.
Right.
Wow. When did they find out that it was brain cancer and not dementia?
We had enrolled her in a day program so that I could go to work for my brother. And so I would take her to this day program, and she fell out her wheel. Somehow she toppled her wheelchair over backwards while she was at that center, and she injured her head. So they took her for a CT scan of her head, and that's when they found out that her whole brain was engulfed by this tumor.
Wow, that's horrible.
Yeah.
Okay. So throughout this time, when you'd gotten out of prison, you remained vegetarian? Had you
Yes. Yeah.
what was going on with you in terms of how you were eating, how you were thinking about animals?
All vegetarian. I mean, yeah, I stayed vegetarian, and I would never consider going back to eating animals for sure. And
And
then
then
then I met my husband. I had a yellow lab named Sophie, and I took her. I My brother, he got me an excellent job for a business as a paralegal. One of his clients, my brother's a lawyer, and
and you were in Maryland at this point?
yes, yeah, in Howard
Still
County.
okay.
It's a county that's between Baltimore and Washington D.C. It's and I don't know if you've heard of Columbia, Maryland, but that's a pretty big
Yep.
bedroom community for both those cities. Anyway, my brother Bob had gotten me a really good job, and it was just 5 minutes from my mother's house. I got my Labrador, and I would take her at lunchtime. I would leave work and take her to a nearby dog park, and then I would also take her after work. So I met my husband Paul. We met at the dog park, and the way that we met was Jeter, his 60-pound dog. I was coming from work with Sophie, and I was still like in business attire. And I came into the park, and Jeter came running across and jumped up on me, and he had mud all over his paws. He got it on my face, he got it on my shirt, and that's how Paul and I met. He was laughing, and I was saying, "Apologize, your dog just got mud all over me." But and he was a widower. He's like an incredible human. His first wife, Maureen, who was this angelic, just wonderful, wonderful woman, had had been diagnosed with Hodgkin's when she was right after they got married. They got married very young. He was 21, she was 18, and she was diagnosed with Hodgkin's. And so she, back then, the chemo and the radiation especially, just did terrible damage. The way it was, just so she had a lot of lung damage and other organ damage from all the radiation that she'd had. So she died when she was 48, and he had taken care of her. He had, when she was in the hospital for almost a year at the end. He would go every day after work, and he took care of their three kids. Well, the oldest was not in
Wow.
the house, but he still had two at home. I mean, he was amazing. So I had not been interested in dating, to say the least. And I had so much baggage, and it was just, I just really had no interest. Like, people at work kept trying to set me up with these rich businessmen, and I was, no, 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 not interested. So when Paul and I just clicked, and we were married within the year.
Wow.
Totally
Wow.
different backgrounds. He's from Long Island, and he was a city boy.
Very sweet. Wow. And yeah, how did your vegetarianism go over with him?
He tries, and he's very accepting, and he's very protective about it. If we're going to a restaurant, he's always checking out the menu for me in advance, and but he has not gone all the way. And of course, later when we moved up here to Owego in 2006, then I became a vegan, and because I started reading about factory farm practices with the dairy industry and the egg industry, and then I realized that eating eggs and dairy was just as harmful, if not more, in a way, to animals as being a carnivore. So I completely switched when we moved up here.
Yeah. Yeah, I had the same wake up call at a certain point, and for me, I just somewhat bemoan all the years I was a non-vegan vegetarian. Just I mean, I thought I was helping, but in hindsight,
Yours
I
was
don't think it
2011,
was.
right? Is that?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yep. And then I'm not sure how long I was vegetarian prior to that, but quite some time. Yeah. So what was it like for you when you made that leap from vegetarian to vegan? Do you
What
remember
was
it specifically? Was there a specific day or, decision that you made?
I don't remember specifically. I remember that I had David Nyberg, his book Animal Oppression and Human Violence had a big impact on me, and that really solidified it. I think that was 2013. So
Okay.
I think it was then.
How did
But
yeah, how does
he
that
practices at home pretty
Okay, so you
pretty
have
consistently.
a
Yeah,
vegan household
yeah.
mostly. Okay, gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. So what's it been like, just rebuilding your life from your previous version of what was going on with you?
Well, this place is. I mean, we turned our property into a big paradise. It's like a refuge. I'm a bit reclusive, although I'm social when I'm around friends or family, but I like to be reclusive. And
Well, you have, like you said, when you have a paradise, it makes sense to want to spend a
yeah,
lot of time there. So, so when did you start writing, and tell us about that part of yourself?
I started it probably, I would say probably almost 20 years ago, because my
Wow.
husband, there were a couple things that happened. One of them was that my husband, he's really down to earth, feet on the ground, not mystical, but he told me that he had gotten up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, and he looked out the bathroom window. It was summertime, and he saw up near the woods this spinning light cluster, and it was under a tree by the edge of the woods, and then it floated around, and then it disappeared. And I was taken with that. And then right around that time, somebody mentioned to me that when they looked into the eyes of their dog, the dog was an angel. And I started thinking, really, you look into the eyes of any animal and you can see an angel the same way you can look in the eyes of your cat or your dog, you know. And so that I came up with the idea of writing a fantasy novel. It was just going to be a novel, not a trilogy initially, about with that as the concept that animals were actually all animals were supernatural beings, and they were forced to take on flesh and blood bodies so that people wouldn't worship them until because wars were being fought over them initially, and so they took on these flesh and blood bodies, but they were constantly reborn into the same animal body after they were killed. So then two children would be born, and when these two children met up, they would have the joint power to change the way people saw animals, so that people would look at animals and realize that they were actual conscious emotional beings just like humans.
Yeah, so I've read your three books. They're, amazing, and so such a graphic, extensive, just fantastical world. How did you come up with just this whole conception? I mean, all the different characters, all the different just ideas. I mean, I love the thought of just how difficult it was for humans not to worship the animals, and the animals didn't want to be worshiped. Like, where did that whole just quandary
I really
come
have no
from?
idea. Chrissy, I'll tell you, it when I would write, it would just pour out of me. I know that most people who write have an outline and they want to. Did you have an outline when you wrote your book?
Well, it depends. I mean, in the writing world, there's a term that's sometimes used to distinguish different types of writers, and they say you're either a planner or a pantser. Pantsers are people who fly by the seat of their pants and just write and find out what happens as they write. And then planners are, you know, they have an idea and they plot it out. And I'm definitely both. I think a lot of writers have aspects of both, but what you're describing is, yeah, the second
I
variety. Yeah.
definitely am in that category.
Uh,
Look at my youth. What else would you expect?
exactly. Yes. Yeah. Good
So
point.
yeah, a lot of times I would read it back and I would be like, really like, wow, where did that come from?
Yeah. Where did even just the names and the terms come from? Like, for instance, you call the animals and Deor. How do you pronounce
Well,
that?
that has a Latin root for a god.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Did, did not know that. So that
yeah.
makes sense.
Even all the names of all the animals, I researched them, and they mean like they mean what the animal. If I had a lion, I would use a foreign word for lion as the name of
Gotcha.
the animal. Yeah.
Okay. And one thing I was curious about in the books, there's a lot of involvement in the foster care system. And I'm just wondering, like, where that came from. It doesn't sound like you were in foster care yourself
No, but
growing up.
I did have a foster sister for a while.
Oh,
And I was in school with some kids who were foster children. And, I've always just really empathized and sympathized with what it must be like to be in the foster system and not to have at least one parent who, you know, is really cares about you, and to be placed with strangers. And yeah, so
right.
I wanted to focus on that. I was trying to bring awareness to the issues that matter to me, and that is an issue
Yeah.
that matters to me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was interesting for me to read. And then coincidentally, just after I had finished reading the trilogy, in fact, it was just last week, I had a hair appointment, and this hairstylist, it turned out she had grown up in foster care, and she told me just heart-wrenching story. She told me all about it. It was almost like a therapy session, but just, horrific abuse. And, I asked her if there had been one positive person, and she just said, no, no.
Wow.
I think at the very, very end, she did end up land with a couple who, loved her, and she's still in touch with them. But that was, right before she left the system. And prior to then, it had just been, you know, decades of abuse. It was very interesting to me because I had never given tons of thought to that system. I was aware of it, but it was just funny because that is a very prominent aspect of these books, is that the
Yes.
children are in foster care. And so it was just very interesting to then meet this real life human who told me all about her story. Yeah. So what would you like to tell people about these books? And yeah, who do you think they're best recommended for or suited to?
I think that anybody who enjoys fantasy, but again, I actually have a warning in there that the people who are racist or misogynistic or really bigoted probably will not enjoy these books because there is, of course, a political current throughout the book. I've gotten people who have read them who are on that side or very offended by them.
It was, yeah. What sort of responses have you gotten?
Warnings not to read them because of the political ideology in them. I try not to read those reviews as soon as
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because veganism and animals are a touchy subject in general. So few people are even willing to consider that. And then when you throw in some political leanings as well, you're kind of,
And the
yeah.
reason I did that is because I strongly believe that our tendency to dehumanize other humans carries over into our treatment of animals and vice versa. That our treatment of animals causes us to treat other humans who are different from us poorly. That was something that Dave Nybert has written a lot about. And another aspect of the book is that the first chapter of book one is is it's a really strong chapter, and it's a dream sequence of one of the major characters, and she's dreaming of an Auschwitz type camp where people have been killed and then they're being experimented on, and then and then their bodies are changing back and forth between human and animal, and then it turns into a cooking competition, and it's pretty graphic, and it has a lot of shock value, and that comes from, if you've read Charles Patterson, Eternal Treblinka, and that to animals, it's for animals, life is an eternal Treblinka for farm animals, and that it's just a graphic way of illustrating what they originally proposed.
Right. And it is fascinating. I mean, this is something that I learned after I went vegan, but just a lot of those same technologies and mechanisms that were used in the Holocaust were also used, borrowed. Like, it's sometimes hard to know which came first, but in animal ag, it's literally the same
Right.
tools and technologies. And yeah, I mean, I definitely, how our treatment of non-human animals carries over to our treatment of humans is a subject that, yeah, I completely agree is very important to consider. And it's something that even when in my early days as a vegetarian, and even in my early days as a vegan, I didn't fully get that piece. I won't even, not just fully, I would say I didn't get that piece. I I thought for a period of time, like, yes, this is important to me, and I don't think we should hurt animals if we don't need to, so therefore I'm going to be vegan, but I won't claim that this is the most important issue, compared to what we're doing to humans and all the other forms of suffering. And then I came to feel, and it was largely through reading and just other forms of education, some of these people who've given these issues a lot of thought, just, I completely came to agree with you that yes, what we do to non-human animals, well, number one, we inevitably end up doing to humans, no question about it. It's almost like we practice on the non-human animals and then do it to the humans. For instance, with years ago when I was living in New York City, I attended a talk by a guy who'd written a book exposing Tyson Foods and just, some of their horrible practices and the things that they, the way they exploit farmers and workers and, everybody within their reach. And it was just very interesting because the author himself was not vegan. And at the end of the talk, there was a Q&A, and I, of course, felt compelled to just raise my hand and say, well, where do you think they learn to otherize and to exploit. They start with the birds and then they continue that same attitude and mindset and practice with humans and underprivileged populations. Yeah. Yeah. So how long did it take for you to finish writing these books, and what was that whole process like for you?
500 years. It feels like. It went through various permutations. It started out the first time I did it, I was calling it the Wakers, and then it was the World Tilters, and then I came up with everything's better with bacon, and you can never have enough butter. But then along comes karma, because if I'll watch these cooking shows because it motivates me, and like on the Food Network, I get motivated. I get so angry. I keep it inside and I simmer, but it causes me to write, and those are mantras. Everything's better with bacon. You can never have enough butter, and that's how I came up with that title. And then it seems like when I changed the title, everything just really clicked, and I just I rewrote it from start to finish, and finally finished it. And I want to give a shout out to Marion Owens Clatterbaugh, who did, I noticed, again, I reread them recently because for this interview, and I noticed some errors in a couple of the books, and I was like, oh my God. And Marion didn't pick those up, but she had been an editor for various magazines throughout her life. She's retired now, but she worked so hard editing these books. It was so good. Like, she picked up some, it was back before AI, actually. I probably could have had an AI editor do a lot of the work for me, but she spent hours and hours editing these books, and that's why I ended up renaming one of the primary characters after her. And also Sister Hildegard, the nun who's in it, that was her mother's name, and her mother just died last year, so I named her after her to thank her.
Oh,
but, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, also I enjoyed the various names. One character's name I particularly enjoyed was Stanley Ostrowski, because Ostrowski is my mother's maiden name, although because she's Ukrainian. But yeah, every time I saw Ostrowski, I just felt special.
Well, Stanley Ostrowski was actually my step-grandfather. My grandfather, actually, in the book, one of the characters, his father dies in a boiler explosion. Well, that was actually how my real grandfather died, in a boiler explosion when he was in his 30s, and he was Polish. And that part of Stanley Ostrowski was based a lot on my father. His name was Stanley, and he was raised in a Polish community. But yeah, so when his father died, his mother eventually remarried, and a man named Stanley Ostrowski, and I always thought he was our real grandfather until my grandmother died, and then I realized, I found out he wasn't, but we kept in touch, and he was a lovely man.
So what's it been like for you having these books out in the world and just hearing people's reactions to them?
It's interesting. I mean, I'm just glad we've done it. I am focused on people's reactions because I want them to, I'm trying to make them get the point that not just dogs and cats are animals. You see these ASPCA ads, and they'll say another animal should not suffer, or don't let another animal suffer. Well, 80 billion animals a year are killed around the world for our pleasure. 10 billion are in factory farms every year in the United States. I mean, but they don't count. I mean, for some reason, a cow doesn't count. A pig doesn't count. A turkey doesn't count.
And not only that, the dogs that they're trying to save are usually eating animals themselves.
Exactly.
So there's a whole other layer there too.
A whole other industry is based on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard from some people who did seem to kind of get the point you were going for?
Yes. Yeah. One person told me that ending hit him like a freight train, and I thought that was pretty cool. And a lot of people have said the books really stuck with them, and they made them think for a long time afterward. So that's good.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about. And I really appreciate that nuance between how we regard animals, like worshiping them, turning them into gods. That's not appropriate. But of course, abusing them and torturing them and exploiting them isn't appropriate either. And I think that's just a very helpful perspective to carry into all our relationships. We don't want to idolize people. We don't want to make anybody, any other human, into a god. But nor do we want to disregard them, disrespect them. So yeah, there's a lot of food for thought that will continue to simmer in my own mind. And
Thank you.
Congratulations to you. I mean, when I wrote my book, my first novel, Marrying Myself, I realized after doing that writing the book is actually the easy part. Yeah, that's the fun part. That's the easy part. It's what comes next. That's a little more challenging for a lot of us sensitive artist types. Was that the case for you? Was it daunting to try to bring these out into
oh my gosh, yes. Yeah.
cold, cruel world?
Yeah.
Well, congratulations to you on accomplishing that monumental feat that very, very few people do. Very few people even write a book and finish a book, let alone actually bring it out into the world. And what's the best place for people to check them out, to buy them?
It's on Amazon, and it's also on Kindle Unlimited for free if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription. They're pretty much everywhere.
Awesome.
Amazon is where they're published.
Again, thank you so much for coming on and being so open and candid about your own story, your own just personal trajectory. So many pockets of your story that are so interesting and inspiring. I mean, just the dark places that addiction can take us and the beautiful places that love and integrity and determination can also take us. So
I think it's important for people to realize that just because they've done something horrible, of course, most people haven't done what I've done, but just because you've done something horrible doesn't mean you can't turn yourself around and do something good. And I've got to tell you, Chrissy, that when first contacted me about this podcast, and then I decided that it was important to be honest about my background because it's something that I haven't really discussed, and I haven't discussed it in connection with these books either. You had a lot of second thoughts about it, and then you and I had one Zoom call, and you were just so gracious and warm and empathetic, and it's clear you're a counselor because I really would have backed out otherwise. It would only have been you that I would have done this with. So thank you for that. Because I wanted to discuss it because it's part of who I am.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. And again, kudos to you for your courage and willingness to be candid and forthright and to speak your own truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yeah. And we've all got all of those things within us. That's the reality. Yours is kind of a more extreme example. Or a more maybe official example, just because you've got a record.
Right.
But again, thank you. It's been fascinating talking to you, and definitely check out Susan's books. And we close every episode by taking 30 seconds of silence for all the suffering animals, human and non-human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. So, Susan, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the animals, and we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Posse. See you next time. Until then, stay strong and stay true.